Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating GeneCapsule analysis about a massive invisible force that is completely redefining global trade. We hear so much about the future of manufacturing, but the real transformation, it's actually happening behind the scenes, far away from all the flashy headlines. So, we're going to break down exactly what this force is, how it operates, and most importantly, why it absolutely matters to you. Okay, let's dive right into this by clearing up a major misconception. The biggest shift in manufacturing right now is not artificial intelligence. It isn't advanced robotics, and it's not 3D printing either. I mean, sure, those technologies are definitely important, but the true catalyst right now is something much quieter and arguably much more powerful. It's something that dictates exactly where factories are built, how supply chains are routed, and ultimately, how much everything costs. So here is our agenda for today. Number 1, a quiet manufacturing revolution. Number 2, decoding the CBAM puzzle. Number 3, global supply chain impacts. And number 4, the future of manufacturing. Section 1, a quiet manufacturing revolution, the hidden shift in global trade. We usually think of innovation as something born in a lab, or maybe a Silicon Valley garage, right? But right now, the most disruptive innovations in global heavy industry are actually being born in legislative chambers. A single policy shift can instantly reroute billions of dollars in international trade and literally force entire industries to rethink their fundamental business models overnight. As the analysis points out, this transformation is happening entirely behind the scenes. It's an invisible force because it doesn't look like a shiny new machine on a factory floor. Instead, it looks like new data requirements, complex compliance forms, and entirely new financial mathematics being calculated in customs offices and corporate boardrooms all around the world. Moving on to Section 2, decoding the CBAM puzzle. What exactly is this policy? Okay, CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. I want you to think of this objectively as a border toll. It's a mechanism that simply assigns a hard financial cost to the environmental footprint of incoming products. For decades, if a company manufactured a product using highly polluting methods in one country and then shipped it to another, well, the carbon emissions were essentially free. They were just an invisible externality. CBAM changes that completely. It takes the carbon emissions embedded in the creation of a product and slaps a definitive price tag on them right at the border.
So here is how it actually intercepts traditional trade in 3 simple steps. First, a shipping container arrives at the border. Second, the importer can't just pay a standard tariff anymore. They actually have to declare the exact carbon emitted to manufacture those specific goods. That requires some intense forensic accounting. And third, a carbon price is applied. High emissions mean a high toll, clean energy means a discount. It is incredibly straightforward in theory, but massively disruptive in practice.
Section 3, global supply chain impacts, the ripple effect across borders. The absolutely crucial point here is this stark contrast. We're transitioning from an era where carbon was completely invisible to one where it's a direct line item on your balance sheet. In traditional manufacturing, you sourced materials purely based on who could make them the cheapest. But now, cheap materials manufactured with dirty energy suddenly become extremely expensive once they hit the border. Carbon accountability is now directly tied to import costs, which completely changes the math on global sourcing. So which heavy industries are experiencing the most intense shockwaves? Well, we aren't talking about smartphones or sneakers here. We are talking about the foundational building blocks of civilization: steel, cement, and fertilizers. Because these sectors are historically deeply reliant on fossil fuels, targeting them sends immediate, huge shockwaves through automotive production, global construction, and even global agriculture. And listen, this isn't some distant hypothetical. The policy is actively rolling out right now in 3 phases, forcing immediate compliance and long-term strategic shifts. Phase 1 is a transitional reporting phase. Companies don't pay the toll yet, but they must start the incredibly complex task of tracking and reporting their carbon data. Next up is Phase 2, the full financial implementation phase, where the actual payments kick in based on those emissions. Finally, Phase 3 is a broad expansion phase, where the policy will sweep up more and more complex manufactured goods. The clock is already ticking on this. Finally, Section 4, the future of manufacturing, a new global standard. The sheer scale of this shift is immense. A massive slice of global heavy industry exports is suddenly subject to these new carbon pricing metrics. Think about it. If you manufacture anywhere in the world and you want to sell into a market that enforces a CBAM, you have to play by these rules. It effectively exports domestic climate policy to the rest of the planet. forcing a global standard simply through the massive purchasing power of the importing market.
We are essentially looking at three concrete future trajectories. First, an accelerated shift to green energy and production. Clean power is no longer just good PR, it is a hardcore competitive advantage. Second, the relocation of manufacturing hubs. Factories are going to start moving away from countries with cheap labor but dirty grids and toward regions with abundant, cheap, renewable energy. And third, mandatory supply chain transparency. The days of opaque, untraceable global sourcing are completely over, simply because you cannot price what you cannot prove.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. We've talked a lot about steel and cement and border mechanisms, but ultimately all of this cascades down to you. Because this invisible policy mechanism will eventually show up in the price tags, the availability, and the origins of everything we consume. From the car you drive to the food on your table, the invisible force of carbon pricing is already quietly redesigning the world. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep a close eye on how this fascinating shift continues to unfold.